Welcome to the Regulatory Transparency Project's fourth branch podcast series. All expressions of opinion are those of the speaker.
So thank you for joining us. My name is Brent Skorup. I'm a legal fellow at the Cato Institute, and I've had an interest and have written about for years aviation law and technology law and policy. And I'm very pleased to open this recording about the FAA and emerging technologies, in particular UAS, small drones, and advanced air mobility. And so we'll be talking about that today and what's going on in these industries and how the FAA is reacting to these new technologies. I'm very pleased to be joined by Charlie Trippe. He was chief counsel of the FAA during the first Trump administration, and he also served as general counsel to both the governor of Florida and the attorney general of Florida, and is now in private practice. Lisa Ellman is also with us, and she is the chair of the Uncrewed Aircraft Systems practice at Hogan Lovalls. She's the co-founder and CEO of the Commercial Drone Alliance, and previously she also held a variety of positions at the White House and the U.S. Department of Justice, including working on developing some drone policies at the DOJ. And I want to thank you, Charlie and Lisa, for being here and making time for this. So we'll just go right into it. I think the average person, well, the average listener probably does not follow aviation policy all that closely. I think many would be surprised at what's going on when it comes to aviation technology. So to start out, I'll go to Lisa first, but why in the past decade or so, why has there been this burst of investment and interest and policy change when it comes to drones and this new advanced aviation sector?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Brent. Thanks for having me. Great to be with both you and Charlie today on this very important topic. So obviously, yes, over the last several decades and last several years, what used to be considered toys are now really tools of industry and public agencies. And drones have increased in the demand for drone technology has really increased over the years because of the benefits that they have for the American people, for industry, for business, for the public sector as well. So whether it's enhancing safety, obviously there are no people on board drones, right? So enhancing safety in the airspace, as well as increasing efficiencies. So saving lots and lots of money for critical infrastructure inspections, disaster response, public safety efforts, consumer drone deliveries we're hearing about a lot in the news. They're amazing. They enable governments to make better use of taxpayer dollars and so much more. And so the technology has improved drastically. What has created this kind of artificial ceiling here in the United States has been the policy, and I know that we'll talk about that. So look forward to that.
And Charlie, from your perspective, why has there been so much investment? Why so much interest in these?
Well, I agree with
aviation sectors. Everything
that Lisa said. I also think new aviation technology is perceived as environmentally friendly. A lot of these things are both UAS and we'll also talk about advanced air mobility. They are electrically propelled and with more efficient routing and traffic management techniques, there'll be less of a energy burn, fuel burn. And so I think people have a high level of interest in them because they think this is transitioning us to a new era of aviation and eventually perhaps environmentally friendly passenger aircraft. And many of these applications, some of which Lisa mentioned, are life-saving. I know Zipline's operation in Africa, they're delivering medicines and medical equipment, hundreds of miles by drones. So, with those stakes, with that sort of benefit coming from these things, it's garnered a lot of attention and should.
And just to add to that, what Charlie said, so on the environmentally friendly, absolutely, I would foot stomp that, but also they're a lot quieter than traditional manned aircraft, right? And so a lot of the challenges that you have with helicopters in the vicinity of where people live is the noise. And this technology is much, in addition to being sustainable, is also much quieter than traditional aviation transportation.
That's right. So it sounds like, a big factor is just batteries have improved. Electrification technologies have improved a lot in the past few years and made possible flying machines that just were not possible in the past. And Charlie, I referenced as well advanced aviation mobility. Could you say a word about what that is? I mean, DC loves acronyms. AAM. I know it's squishy, but
it's a broad term which includes aircraft which are larger than small drones, small UAS. Probably the most important category of these are what are called eVTOLs, which are electric vertical takeoff and landing craft, which in the future will be both autonomously operated and operated by crews, and will carry cargo as well as passengers.
And Lisa, do you have anything to add about AAM?
No, I would just add, obviously, eVTOL, which is electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Speaking of acronyms, right? These electric passenger carrying aircraft are one form of AAM, but not the only form of AAM. We're also seeing enhanced levels of automation in traditionally manned aircraft, for example, what you see companies like what Merlin is doing and others, as well as electrifying what would be, traditional manned aircraft. So there is a range of I would say it's the future of aviation, advanced aviation, kind of lots of different types of aircraft, as well as communications and other types of enabling technologies that are making this era possible.
And they will operate, some may operate locally, for example, taking people from downtown to the airport. But I also think it's anticipated that they'll be operating regionally, and perhaps taking up some of the slack for areas which are now underserved by traditional commercial aviation.
Right. And I know in news stories, these are sometimes called like Jetsons, flying cars, and they're often called air taxis. But the idea is small private aviation that kind of a mass market could access. Particularly with electrification, the idea is you can get into denser urban areas without the public resistance you might see to a helicopter, for instance. I'll go to Lisa for this. Could you talk a little bit about, so you're CEO of the Commercial Drone Alliance. Could you talk a little bit about what your members and what the drone industry are doing today and what they hope to do in the near term if we get the policy right?
Sure. So we are operating today, our members are operating today. Back in 2016, 2017, Part 107 is a new regulation which for the first time ever authorized commercial drone operations, but in a very limited way, right? And so the technologies move very quickly forward. I'll give an example. So it doesn't make any sense to kind of have a 4,000-pound vehicle that needs to be deployed in order to deliver, a pack of Band-Aids from the local drugstore, but that is kind of the current status quo. So we can all recognize there are amazing benefits to using small, lightweight drones for these types of operations. However, the current rule set is vastly outdated and treats drones as manned aircraft. And so, we have been urging over the last several years that we need to have an appropriate risk framework in place for commercial drones that is not geared towards manned aviation. It needs to be appropriately framed around the technology that the agency is mandated to regulate. So, as an example, I currently, unless I have a specific authorization from the FAA, if I'm a business owner that wants to use, like let's say I have an oil and gas facility and I want to be able to use drones to protect, do infrastructure inspections to prevent oil spills before they happen, prevent leaks, that kind of thing. There's clear benefit in doing that, but unless you have a specific authorization, I can't fly a drone beyond visual line of sight, meaning farther than my human eye can see. Which doesn't make any sense, right? If you can't, drive a car outside of your own driveway, you're not going to use it, right? So the utility to industry has been very limited, not because of the technology, but because of the policies. The policies are, we've had regulatory stagnation. It hasn't moved forward. It's really lagged behind. And right now we're starting to get excited to see some movement within the federal government that we can talk about. But that's we look forward to being able to scale our drone businesses across the nation. And but we need policies to change in order to do that.
Yeah, on that note, I recall reading, it was probably a year or two ago, about Walmart and their drone pilot program. I think it illustrates just cautiousness, natural, and I think justified in some cases, cautiousness of aviation regulators. But under the FAA regulations at the time, it may have improved since the story came out. But Walmart, they're making deliveries to neighborhoods around the Walmart. They were limited to 1 mile, and they had to have 2 licensed operators, one at the Walmart delivery takeoff point, and one I think had to drive to the customer location and monitor just for safety. I mean, I think it was early, but yeah, it's very cautious approach, and probably from some in the industry probably too slow. But I guess on that point, Charlie, could you talk broadly about the state of FAA policy as it pertains to small drones, but also broadly speaking, what they're doing in the kind of large electric AEM area?
Well, as Lisa mentioned, this beyond visual line of sight issue has been kind of a sticking point for a few years. And the FAA had stated in 2024 that they would have a notice of proposed rulemaking out by the end of 2024. That has not happened. We'll talk a little bit about a couple of executive orders that came out of the White House recently, one of which deals specifically with this issue. But without a regulation in place, as Lisa mentioned, the FAA operates on a basis of issuing waivers to people on a individual basis for individual operations. Now, I understand that has gotten a little bit more efficient as time has gone on, and the FAA has been able to use prior operations as a template for approving operations as they come up. But this is still a sticking point with the people that Lisa represents.
Yeah, it's hard to build a business and invest on a waiver that can be revoked at any point, right?
Yeah, it's just a lack of certainty and a lack of sort of regulatory consistency.
I see.
So,
yeah.
Standardization. It's always been a black box approach. So where a company will come to the FAA and they'll say, okay, give us an apple, and then, okay, no, give us an orange, or give us, and you have no idea that, they won't tell you what's required except for whatever you're bringing them is not that. But it's very difficult for companies to build a business around, like Charlie said, the regulatory uncertainty and the standardization. And that's why we have been asking for many years now, and we helped lead an aviation rulemaking committee with industry, working in partnership with the FAA to draft recommendations to the federal agency about how to enable safely, securely, the ability to fly beyond visual line of sight. That was back in 2022, I believe. So it's been, there's been several years now that we've been kind of waiting for the beyond visual line of sight rule to come out. It's a deregulatory action. It's actually peeling away ridiculous regulations that apply to manned aircraft and also apply to drones because they are considered aircraft in a way that does not make sense at all for this technology, right? And so,
and the FAA Reauthorization Act last year mandated that this proceed, and it's
by this. What do you mean?
The notice of proposed rulemaking for the beyond visual line of sight operations. And, the FAA has not been able to meet the timetable set out in the FAA Reauth bill last year. A recent White House executive order has, again, focused on this and has mandated or stated that what should happen is that notice of proposed rulemaking should be out within about 30 days and the final rule within 240 days of the issuance of the EO. So the White House and Congress are both really focused on this.
Okay, so it sounds like, some sticking points are these strict limitations about long distance or beyond visual line of sight operations. And also this kind of bespoke waiver process that makes it unpredictable for companies. Are there other, Lisa, are there other big sticking points that the industry is facing?
Yeah, I would
Are
say
those big
just
ones?
right. So there's the regulatory actions which we're waiting on. I would also add there are some others that are really important for example, for package delivery operations, such as if I want to be able to carry a battery or nail polish or hand sanitizer from, let's say, a drugstore to consumers, that is regulated as if it was manned aviation. And so we need to update what's known as the HAZMAT, hazardous materials regulations as well. You mentioned as an example of the Walmart issue of, and I would say there has been some progress, right? So you have some of these drone companies who are 135 operators now who have the ability to fly beyond visual line of sight. But if you want to, you're operating in one metropolitan area and you want to, go expand your business to operate in a different metropolitan area, you have to go through a whole separate environmental review process that can take up to a year and be very costly, notwithstanding that essentially a very similar process has already been found to have no impact or no significant impact. So there are processes in place now that simply need to improve. As Charlie said, we're thrilled with some recent executive orders that are foot stomping the importance of drone technology to the national security and the economy of our nation. We are thrilled to see the president make a very strong statement in support of the domestic industrial base and this broader drone economy. And we're now very hopeful and working very closely with the White House to ensure that all of these actions are able to move forward in an expeditious way.
Okay, well, on that note, yeah, let's talk about the recent executive orders. Yeah, Lisa, what are the big highlights in those?
Yeah.
And what was the motivation for the White House to do this?
Sure. So yes, we're thrilled to see this. This is a very historic moment for this industry and for broader society, because this is the first time from on high that we have heard that it is critical that our domestic industrial base succeed and is able to thrive here in the United States. So we've been working with the White House very, very, very closely over the last several months on both the innovation and the security side. So the first is essentially, drone dominance is focused on the pro-innovation moves that the White House is mandating that the broader federal agencies and executive branch take in order to ensure and restore American leadership in commercial drone technology. That has been lacking. As I said, we have the technology, but the policies have really lagged behind. We had previously lost our global leadership in this sector. This executive order takes steps in order to be able to regain that. The second, and it focuses on issues like some of what we've talked about. The mandate immediately, let's get this beyond visual line of sight authorization moving within 30 days for a proposed rule. So this, would be sometime probably in July for a proposed rule, and then final rule within 240 days. In the meantime, let's get consumer drone delivery. What is holding industry back, and focusing on moving those all forward. Again, it's all regulatory stagnation, things that have been stuck, environmental streamlining. The second executive order, and we always talk about innovation and security are two sides of the same coin. You can't have innovation without security and vice versa. The White House recognizes that. That's why we see this, pro-innovation, but also pro-drone security. So we recognize that drones can be used for good and for bad, right? Just like any other technology, and that the federal government needs to take steps to enhance drone security measures. So it's around restoring American airspace sovereignty. The idea there is enhancing the ability of the federal government to be able to detect, identify, track drones in the airspace, understand what's out there, where drones are flying, particularly over sensitive airspace such as mass gathering events and sporting events, with the World Cup coming up, with the Olympics coming up, being able to track and then, if necessary, even use counter-drone technology, which is, the mitigation of rogue drones, in highly sensitive areas. We still need, there's still, kind of an avenue that we need Congress to fill here, but this airspace sovereignty security executive order takes really important steps to move that forward. It creates a task force on airspace sovereignty. Again, very importantly, reiterates from on high that this is something that the president cares a lot about and wants to see progress. Both of these industries, the drone innovation and the drone security industries, have had, the technology is there, but the policies have really lagged behind. And this is historically, this is a foot stomp that we need to change that. That needs to end now.
I think also, Brent, the Airspace Sovereignty Executive Board that Lisa just addressed, it also focuses on the ability of state, local, tribal law enforcement to have the ability to track and detect UAS drone activity in appropriate places. So the White House is focused on kind of a federalist issue here, and there's more to talk about there too, which is what should the role of the states and localities be in all of this. So I wanted to make sure that we mention that. You also, one thing we don't want to overlook in terms of the regulatory burden here is sort of a combined regulatory and technical issue, which is how is there going to be we can call it an air traffic control regimen at the lower altitudes where UAS are operating. And what has been anticipated for a long time is something called UAS traffic management, which the FAA has put a lot of thought and effort into over the years, but is still not there. And that is both a regulatory and a technical issue. So there's a lot of issues that have arisen out of the effort to create a system where UAS can speak with one another, speak to a central directing authority so that that traffic is managed in an appropriate and safe manner.
Yeah, thank you for that. And well, before we I'd like to dive into airspace management in a moment. Before we go there, I'd like to know, why. I don't know, how do I put this? Drones are not new. It seems like Congress regularly tells FAA, "Hey, focus on drones. Let's get some long distance flights and services. Let's help this industry." But it happens very slowly. I wonder if you can speak to. I mean, Charlie, you were in the FAA. My mental kind of assumption is FAA. It's a large organization. Their primary concern, quite justifiably, are the safety of commercial airlines, and they manage air traffic. They certify aircraft. They do a lot of things, and drones they're just not in the top 5 of their priorities. Is that right, or are there other things going on?
No, I don't think that's right. I think that UAS have been one of the priorities of the FAA for a long time. But the FAA is first and foremost a safety agency, as you say, and so their tendency is to be very careful and to work slowly and deliberately towards a solution that will be acceptable from the point of view of traditional aviation safety management. I mean, with traditional commercial aviation, we have had amazing success over the years in terms of reducing the number of accidents, especially fatal accidents. And that's been, through an amazing effort by not just the regulator, the FAA, but also the industry participants as well. So that mindset carries over to regulating UAS. And when I was at the FAA, we were working on the operations over people regulation. And, that was very carefully calibrated by engineers and lawyers who are deeply experienced in these things. And it's simply the way the FAA has operated because of defaulting to a safety first mentality. And I don't think it's a reflection of subordinating UAS to other interests. I think everyone at the FAA understands that UAS are very important in terms of their potential economic impact on our, in this country and worldwide.
Just to add to, I think all of that is right. I would also say that some of it I do think is cultural. I think that there are a lot of folks at the FAA who are struggling to, again, it's fitting a square peg into the round hole. I don't actually blame necessarily the agency. I think it's very challenging for them. They're trying to regulate a technology that does not look like, feel like, weigh anywhere near as much as, it's not carrying people, like a very, very, very different technology than a big, Boeing 737, but it's the same set of regulations that actually applies. And so they're struggling. And I think that it's been as a safety agency, I think there's always just kind of the, okay, well, if it's hard, let's put it aside. If it's, and I agree that it's been kind of high level of priority within the agency. But I also think that it's an interagency process, and the FAA is not the only stakeholder here, right? So I think the FAA did really good work at the end of last year to try to move the beyond visual line of sight rulemaking through, and kind of ran into some hiccups with the broader interagency. So there are a lot, the national security agencies also have a seat at the table, and I think there's some misunderstanding, right? So if we are enabling the careful, commercial, compliant, authorized drone users, that does not mean that the rule is simultaneously enabling, the careless, the clueless, the criminal drone operators to be flying beyond visual line of sight. The rule is designed to have frameworks in place that enable the good, not the bad. The problem is you have some of the national security agencies which worry that by enabling the good, are we also enabling the bad? And so part of it too is just having to educate like the broader interagency community who isn't as focused day to day as some of the folks working these issues at the FAA, that no, like that's not what this is about. This is about enabling the good. And by the way, we're also going to be preventing the bad. And that's why it was so important to see the two executive orders side by side from the White House. Pro-innovation, pro-security, all of this can happen together. All of this complements each other, and we need all of this to move forward. So, we need these additional security requirements in order to be able to prevent the bad, but we need this beyond visual line of sight rule to open up incite demand for our domestic drone marketplace, which, by the way, is also a national security issue. So, in some ways, I think that, and part of it too, I just think is generational, and over time is folks that are very educated in this technology in particular and hired into the FAA. I think that will, improve kind of an understanding of the technology. But that said, there has been a lot of great work at the FAA, and there are some offices that have been doing an excellent job trying to move this forward within their own authorities.
Remember that the barriers to entry into the UAS realm are very, very low. I mean, a person can go into Walmart and buy a drone for, pocket change compared to what it takes to buy even a small general aviation aircraft, right? So, the FAA and all the law enforcement agencies, federal and state, have to be anticipating people who will be on the fringes of aviation suddenly moving in there, whether they have good intentions or bad. So it's a difficult regulatory problem, much different from traditional aviation.
Yeah. On that note of safety, I mean, the FAA is a safety regulator first and foremost. Drones pose very different. They pose some safety problems. I mean, I know. I mean, there's a big issue now of drones. Bad actors flying drones over prisons, dropping contraband and weapons into prisons. I mean, there's just very different safety issues than traditional aviation that understandably the FAA is not.
Well, but
and a lot of that is local law enforcement. We'll have to deal with a lot of that.
Yes, but if a UAS, a drone, of let's say 50 pounds, which is in the stream of commercial air traffic in and around a big airport, could be a very, very dangerous thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, kind of a threat to traditional
correct
aviation and airspace as well. Well, so on that note of airspace, not only do drones and AM, pose different safety issues than traditional aviation, they also pose very different traffic management issues. I think at any one time the FAA is actively managing 5,000, a few thousand aircraft at one time. I think there are 1 million commercial drones licensed at this point, and a lot of this is at a pilot stage right now or at a waiver stage when it comes to deliveries. But I think the dream is, one day we would have kind of nationwide networks of drone delivery services and corridors and advanced air mobility flying, giving people more opportunities to fly private. But that would be a huge technology shock to the FAA. So let's talk about traffic management, airspace management a little bit. And I know this is early, but Lisa, can you talk a little bit about what the FAA has done in this area of traffic management, what they anticipate, what you think they'll do when it comes to this technology shock of possibly millions of small drones entering regulated airspace.
Sure. So first, let me, this is low altitude airspace. So this is primarily 400 feet and below.
Talking small drones.
Small drones, 400 feet and below. For these more complex operations, obviously, Charlie, you mentioned UTM, unmanned traffic management. And this is happening right now in Dallas, right? So it's known as the key site, but in the Dallas metropolitan area, they have been, there are drone companies which have all kind of been working together to ensure that if two drones are flying in the same area, right, that they're able to deconflict with each other. And that all happens just, essentially drone to drone system within this UTM system. It's an industry run with FAA kind of signing off on the safety of what are known as the USS, like the service suppliers. And we see that as a federated model that we believe will be very successful. And we're seeing other communities want to do the same thing. So that, we want to encourage that. But I will mention there's obviously, you had mentioned the drone to aircraft, right? So this is something that we have been trying to enhance safety for a long time. One of the challenges for drones is we always want to be able to avoid manned aircraft. In order to avoid manned aircraft, we need to know where they are. And so it's about understanding where what we would call non-cooperative aircraft that are not, for whatever reason, using some kind of communications technology like a transponder, like ADS-B, that drones can receive that worries us, right? We can do everything in our power to use detect and avoid technology and ensure that we're staying out of the way of manned aircraft. In order to do that, we believe that there needs to be some kind of communications on the other side as well, communicating with us as well. So this is actually part of this beyond visual line of sight rulemaking. Part of the challenge for drone companies has been you can't fly beyond visual line of sight because how do you deal with non-cooperative aircraft? The federal government is going to make its attempt at trying to handle that with some policy advances, and that's something that we've been asking for many years now.
And when you talk about these transponders, I mean, the large commercial airlines all have these transponders, right? It's more smaller general aviation.
Well, even today, most general aviation aircraft have what's called ADS-B out, meaning they transmit their identity and location.
Most,
but not all.
Okay, but
right.
but
and
that's
so it's
primarily
that small percentage. Yeah. So it's that small percentage of the non-cooperatives that is dictating the policy for this huge industry for the million drones, right? So that's where there's a disconnect.
Sure.
You have to sort of visualize a world which, may well come to be where in this 400 foot and below low altitude airspace, there are many, many small drones operating. And while this pilot program in Dallas, I don't know too much about it, but I assume it's been successful, as Lisa suggests. To scale that up nationally is a challenge. The FAA is not going to be an air traffic controller in that low altitude realm as it has been traditionally for commercial aviation. There has to be another solution. And so this UAS traffic management concept, which has been worked on by the FAA and others for several years, would depend on things that are foreign to the air traffic control system as we understand it today, which is based on aircraft speaking with the central authority, the FAA, and its air traffic control organization. So some of the issues that have come up in terms of getting UTM scalable and manageable on a national basis is whether I'll just name a few of the factors. Is there an economic case for private sector involvement in this system? Because it doesn't seem that the FAA or state and local governments are going to be able to do it on their own. Will there be developed standards for this, electronic and engineering standards for this system, as there have been for commercial aviation? Whether there's going to be a consensus on those segments of airspace which ought to be included in here, for example, so-called Class G airspace. There are cybersecurity concerns, and there's an issue out there, a regulatory and technical issue out there, which is that the FAA did mandate with a prior rulemaking that drones identify themselves, but with a broadcast technology. But that broadcast technology is not really compatible with a network-based UTM system. So there would have to be a further improvement or addition to that system that is the U.S. have been using for the last few years under the FAA's regulation. So there's a lot of sort of mixed technical and regulatory issues in there, which make I think you have to be very careful about assuming that UTM will be up and running nationally anytime soon. Would you agree with that, Lisa?
I mean, I will say, just kind of in terms of some context for some of these, potential solutions to enhance safety, that these UTM is a fuzzy word. Like it means different things to different people. So it's not a one size fits all solution, right? It's about individual parties working within the system to enhance safety, right? And so it's kind of a collection of services. And one of the things that we have been asking for a long time that was part of this Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee was an approval, the role that we would see the FAA clearly being the expert here and having is signing off on the safety of these services, which would then be provided to the industry, right? And that's going to be within this kind of general rulemaking. There's the Part 108, which is the Beyond Visual Line of Sight piece of it, and then Part 146, which is the approval for service supplier piece of it, which I think will be a step in the right direction. I agree with Charlie that the remote ID rule, which was formalized, implemented now a few years ago, was a missed opportunity because the initial drafts of that had been around enabling broadcast technology and network technology. It ended up being more prescriptive for broadcast technology only, which could have laid a foundation for this UTM system. So we're to some extent kind of catching up from where we could have been.
And one other point, I think in our minds as we've been speaking, we're sort of thinking about 5-pound drones delivering pizzas, in some suburban neighborhood, but it's going to be much more complex and variegated than that. There'll be 50-pound cargo drones or 500-pound cargo drones, and those things will operate to some extent in that low altitude airspace at 400 feet and below, but they're also going to be, eventually, they're going to be operating in the traditional aviation realm of airspace that's controlled by the FAA. So how is all that going to be coordinated? It's a complex issue.
Yeah, so it sounds like, for drone traffic management at low altitude airspace, you'll need sensors, you'll need comms, communication systems, wireless communications. I mean, someone's got to pay for that. FAA probably is not. So the industry will need to figure out how to monetize the air traffic management services that they'll need to provide. And I'm sure there'll be competing business models, competing ideas about how to do that. But it sounds like it's kind of too early to tell how that will shake out. Is that right?
I mean, I'm seeing a lot there. Again, I'm seeing a lot of progress behind the scenes. It's kind of like
sure.
But certainly it will be a journey. But I do think that this Beyond Visual Line of Sight rulemaking, once it comes out, and the 146 portion of it, once companies can kind of have a sense of what's going to be required in order to provide those systems, it will provide some regulatory clarity to figure out how all this works, and then you'll see the market kind of shake itself out.
Okay. And so we're talking about small drones at low altitudes. Charlie, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about advanced air mobility, the idea of 2-ton cargo drones and perhaps eVTOL and air taxis. How again, I mean, I think it's even earlier for this technology, but
well, there has been regulatory movement. I mean, the FAA has recently issued a regulation on powered lift aircraft, which would, in your mind's eye, electrically powered aircraft, which rely on those motors to provide lift as opposed to just the wings providing lift as in a conventional aircraft. So this is sort of the air taxi concept, but as we mentioned earlier, this would be, there would be broader applications for it than just taxiing people to the airport. So that recent FAA rulemaking dealt with pilot certification and some other issues which are important to the industry. And those issues, I think, have been adequately addressed in that regulation. There was also regulatory action by the FAA in terms of certifying the aircraft themselves. Now, of course, the FAA has a complex but longstanding process for certifying new aircraft as they're produced by traditional aircraft manufacturers like Boeing. In terms of AAM aircraft, it seemed that the FAA backed away from allowing those aircraft to be certified under what's called Part 23, which is a less prescriptive regulatory scheme that allows for general aviation aircraft to be certified in a sort of a less complex and prescriptive manner than has been traditionally done by the FAA. The FAA moved away from that and is effectively treating each airframe as an experimental aircraft. So that was, that concerned some people in the industry as to whether the FAA would be going now to a more prescriptive style of regulating in that area than they had hoped for. But I think there's some hope that while that system of certifying aircraft may not have been exactly what the industry wanted, the industry will probably be able to cope with it by watching each other go through that process and sort of getting the benefit of the experience of their competitors as they go through that process with the FAA, and it may make the process somewhat more streamlined. So I think, the FAA is getting there, but there's still other things to be grappled with on the regulatory front with AAM.
And I would just add on so Charlie gave a great kind of overview of the FAA progress there. The White House recent EOs also did speak to AAM, and they the White House announced what's known as the eIPP, eVTOL Integration Pilot Program, which is very similar to what the drone industry had back in 2017 under the first Trump administration, essentially allowing states and localities who are excited to see this technology in their cities and communities apply to be a partner with the federal government in commercializing and in a partner with the federal government, of course, with industry in commercializing and bringing these services to local towns and communities. So I think, anticipate there'll be a lot of interest there. I think one of the questions, there'll be questions in terms of how it's implemented, because there are some relevant differences between small drones and large, AAM aircraft. But certainly it will provide an opportunity at a, high level to prove out these technologies for the American people.
So I'd like to end with one last question to each of you, and that would be, so Congress has been very active in this area. The president, the White House has been quite active recently in this area. If you had the FAA administrator before you, or say the chief counsel, what are your one or two asks to the FAA? Lisa, if you would go first.
I would say let's restore American leadership in this industry. We need FAA as a partner to do so. There are a lot of mandates and requirements in this executive order. We would love to work very closely with the FAA, with the DOT, with all of the federal agencies on implementing it. And, let's get the Beyond Visual Line of Sight rulemaking through. There's the 2209 rulemaking, which is the kind of the security side as well. That's also important. We're here. The Commercial Drone Alliance is here as a partner to restore our American leadership in this sector for the benefit of society. So we're really excited to see some of these recent updates from the White House, to see from on high the strong interest in innovation and security. And, it's critical that we move forward with these very critical deliverables today.
And Charlie, I'll give you the last word.
Well, as Lisa mentioned, the Beyond Visual Line of Sight rule, is a priority, as well as the so-called 2209 issue, which is back in 2016, the FAA reauthorization statute of that time, set out a requirement that the FAA designate participate in a process where we designate critical infrastructure over which drone operations would be regulated. That process has not happened since, it has not happened since 2016, and the White House, again, has recently focused on it. That should be a very high priority. I also think that they really need to focus on the UAS traffic management issue and try to, frame a paradigm that will work for both small UAS in the low altitudes, but also that transitional zone where larger UAS will be operating in the traditional commercial aviation realm.
All right. With that, I want to thank each of you, Lisa Ellman at Hogan Lovalls and Charlie Trippe, formerly Chief Counsel of the FAA. I'm Brent Skorup at the Cato Institute, and I want to thank the Federalist Society and the Regulatory Transparency Project for hosting this talk. And I hope listeners will follow our other episodes about aviation and FAA reform and technology. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Federal Society's Regulatory Transparency Project, thanks for tuning in to the Fourth Branch podcast. To catch every new episode when it's released, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spreaker. For the latest from RTP, please visit our website at regproject.org. That's regproject.org.
This has been a FedSoc audio production.